Gunfire echoes through the sterile white halls of Naval Medical Center San Diego, shattering the midnight silence. Two combat-hardened Marines brace for death, hopelessly outgunned. They never expected their salvation to come from a fumbling rookie nurse, a woman harboring a classified lethal past she desperately tried to bury. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of room 412, distorting the amber glow of the streetlights in the sprawling courtyard below. Inside the high-security ward of Naval Medical Center San Diego, the atmosphere was suffocatingly dull. The rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a ventilator and the steady beep of a heart monitor were the only sounds piercing the dead silence of the graveyard shift. Handcuffed to the reinforced steel frame of the hospital bed lay Mateo Ruiz, a mid-level cartel accountant who'd decided breathing was preferable to dying for his bosses. He was the golden goose for the DEA, possessing encrypted hard drives that could dismantle a multi-billion-dollar human trafficking syndicate spanning from Bogota to Los Angeles. Naturally, his survival was paramount, which was why the United States Marine Corps had been tasked with his protection. Standing post inside the room was Sergeant Tyler Brooks and Corporal Jackson Hayes. Brooks, a seasoned infantryman with deployments to Fallujah and Helmand Province under his belt, stood by the window, his eyes scanning the dark perimeter. He was a man carved from oak, silent and hyper-vigilant. Hayes, on the other hand, was younger, restless, and visibly bored. He leaned heavily against the doorway, his M4 carbine slung loosely across his chest, casually picking at a loose thread on his uniform. "I'm telling you, Sergeant, this is babysitting," Hayes muttered, stifling a yawn that threatened to crack his jaw. "We're guarding a glorified bean counter in a locked-down military hospital. Nobody is stupid enough to hit this place. We've got an entire base of Marines sleeping a mile down the road." Brooks didn't turn around. "Complacency gets you killed, Hayes. The moment you think you're safe is the exact second someone puts a bullet in your spine. Keep your head on a swivel." Hayes rolled his eyes, about to offer a sarcastic retort, when the heavy oak door to the suite squeaked open. Enter Nurse Maya Reynolds. She practically stumbled into the room, her oversized teal scrubs pooling slightly around her sneakers. A plastic tray loaded with saline bags, gauze, and syringes rattled violently in her hands as she caught her toe on the threshold. She gasped, barely managing to keep the medical supplies from clattering onto the linoleum floor, her cheeks flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. Sorry," Maya squeaked, pushing a pair of slightly crooked, thick-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose. Just me. Time for his Zoa 200 vitals and IV flush." Hayes sighed, loud and exaggerated, letting his head fall back against the doorframe. "Careful there, Florence Nightingale. Don't hurt yourself. That saline bag looks heavy." "Lay off her, Hayes," Brooks rumbled, finally turning away from the window. "Just do your job, Mom." "Thank you, Sergeant," Maya whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the floor as she scurried past the heavily armed men. She approached Ruiz's bed with trembling hands, fumbling with the plastic wrapping of a new syringe. She looked exactly like what her ID badge claimed she was, a 24-year-old recent nursing school graduate, terrified of the imposing Marines, squeamish around blood, and entirely out of her depth. But beneath the oversized scrubs, beneath the trembling hands and the stuttering apologies, Maya's mind was a coldly calculating, hyper-vigilant machine. While Hayes saw a clumsy rookie dropping a roll of medical tape, Maya was simultaneously assessing 20 different tactical variables in the room. She noted that Hayes' rifle was unsafe and hung entirely too low on his sling for a rapid engagement. She calculated the exact thickness of the reinforced drywall, standard hospital grade, easily penetrated by 5.56mm rounds, meaning the room offered zero ballistic cover, only visual concealment. She clocked the emergency exit route down the hall, noting that the fire doors were currently propped open with a wedge, a fatal security flaw. Maya Reynolds was not a rookie nurse. Her real rank was lieutenant, and her real occupation was classified at the highest levels at the Department of Defense. She was a Tier 1 operator, one of the first and only females to successfully integrate into the Naval Special Warfare Development Group SL Team 6. 6 months ago, a covert snatch-and-grab operation in Damascus had gone violently sideways. Her cover had been blown, her team compromised, and she had taken a grazing round to the ribs while single-handedly holding an exfiltration corridor for her squad. While the Pentagon let the geopolitical heat die down, they had placed her in the most deeply submerged undercover detail available, guarding Mateo Ruiz. The hospital commander didn't know. Brooks and Hayes didn't know. To the entire world, she was just shy, clumsy Maya. She reached for the IV port on Ruiz's arm, her hands intentionally shaking as she unscrewed the cap. "You look like you're going to pass out, sweetheart," Ruiz mocked from the bed, his voice raspy. "You sure you know what you're doing with that needle?" I'm perfectly capable, sir," Maya stammered, artificially raising the pitch of her voice to sound defensive. She flushed the line with precision, despite the act. "Hey, Reynolds," Hayes called out, flashing a cocky grin. "If the boogeyman comes through that window, you gonna protect us with those trauma shears?" Maya looked down at the heavy black medical scissors tucked into her scrub pocket. She offered a weak, nervous laugh. "I think I'll just hide behind you guys. You have the guns." "Damn straight," Hayes chuckled, patting his rifle. Maya finished her rounds, gathered her tray, and scurried out of the room, offering one last apologetic bow of her head. As the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, the timid posture instantly vanished. Her spine straightened, the nervous flutter in her eyes was replaced by a dead, predatory calm. She walked down the sterile white hallway, her footsteps perfectly silent, rolling from heel to toe, a ghost floating through a brightly lit mausoleum. Something was wrong. The air in the ward felt heavy. It was an instinct, a primal itch at the base of her skull that she had learned to trust in the mountains of Afghanistan and the urban sprawl of Syria. She paused by the nurse's station, glancing at the security monitors. The feed from the hospital's loading dock was static. "Hey, Brenda," Maya said softly to the older charge nurse, keeping her voice completely level. "Has IT said anything about the cameras on the lower levels?" Brenda didn't even look up from her paperwork. "Probably just the storm, honey. Don't worry your pretty head about it. The Marines have it handled." Maya's jaw tightened. She casually reached beneath the desk, her fingers brushing the cold, concealed steel of the 6-hour P320 she had duct-taped to the underside of the counter on her first day. "It's just a storm," she told herself. Maintain the cover. But as she walked toward the supply closet to restock her tray, the hospital's primary overhead lights suddenly violently flickered, buzzed like an angry hornet, and died. Total, suffocating darkness swallowed the ward. The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the emergency generators kicked in, bathing the hallway in a sickly, pulsating crimson light. Inside room 412, Thadden plunged into red-lit darkness, shattered Hayes' boredom instantly. "What the hell?" He barked, his hands finally slapping onto the grip of his M4. "Shut up and lock the door," Brooks commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl. The sergeant was already moving, dragging the heavy metal hospital bed with a panicked Ruiz, still attached to it, away from the window and into the fatal funnel of the doorway. Hayes reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Command, this is Ward 4B. We have a total power loss. Please advise, over." Nothing. Just a thick, unnatural wall of white noise. "Sergeant," Hayes said, the cockiness entirely drained from his voice, replaced by the tight pitch of fear. "Comms are jammed." Brooks drew his sidearm, keeping his rifle slung, and pressed his back against the wall next to the door. "Nobody jams a military grid by accident. Weapons free, Corporal. We are being hit." Out in the hallway, the illusion of safety evaporated. The heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of tactical boots echoed from the eastern stairwell. It wasn't the chaotic stomping of a panicked civilian mob. It was the synchronized, deliberate tread of highly trained assaulters moving in a stack. Maya was halfway into the medical supply closet when the lights failed. She didn't gasp. She didn't freeze. As the red emergency strobes pulsed, her breathing slowed. Her heart rate, which would have spiked to 150 beats per minute in a normal civilian, actually dropped. She was back in her element. She slipped to the doorway of the closet and peered through the narrow crack into the hallway. 4 men emerged from the stairwell. They moved with terrifying fluid precision. They were dressed in sterile black tactical gear, no patches, no insignias. They wore panoramic night vision goggles and carried suppressed compact carbines. Professional hitters. Cartel-funded mercenaries, likely ex-special forces themselves, bought and paid for to ensure Mateo Ruiz never testified. The lead breacher carried a specialized thermal shotgun. He stepped up to the heavy double doors of the ward, aimed at the electronic magnetic locks, and fired twice. The muffled fut-fut of the pressed weapon barely registered over the storm outside, but the heavy doors violently blew open. Maya knew Hayes and Brooks were good Marines, but they were conventional infantry trapped in a box. Against 4 Tier 2 level operators with the element of surprise, the boys were dead meat. In room 412, Brooks heard the doors blow. He risked a rapid, fatal glance around the doorframe to acquire a target. Thwip, whip, whip. A 3-round burst of suppressed fire stitched across the doorway. Drivel exploded. One of the rounds caught Brooks square in the right shoulder, shattering his clavicle and spinning him violently backward to the floor. "Sergeant!" Hayes screamed. Panic took the wheel. Hayes stepped fully into the doorway, raised his M4, and held down the trigger. The unsuppressed 5.56mm rifle roared like a cannon in the confined space. The muzzle flashed blindingly bright in the red emergency lighting. He laid down a wall of suppressive fire, forcing the mercenaries to duck back around the corner. But he was spraying and praying. "Hayes, get back here!" Brooks gasped, clutching his profusely bleeding shoulder. Hayes ducked back into the room, his chest heaving, his ears ringing from the concussive force of his own weapon. He hit the bolt release and slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. "They're in the hall. We're pinned down." Where's the nurse?" Ruiz whimpered from the bed, his eyes wide with terror. "Is she dead?" "Forget the damn nurse," Hayes yelled, terrified. "She's probably curled up under a desk." She wasn't. Down the hall, the 4 mercenaries restacked. The leader signaled with 2 fingers, pointing toward the supply closet to clear their flank before pushing the patient's room. A massive man carrying an HK-4 rifle broke off from the stack and kicked the supply closet door wide open, sweeping his barrel through the darkened, red-lit room. He stepped inside, his night vision goggles painting the rows of bandages and saline bags in stark neon green. He didn't look up. Maya was braced between the top of the industrial metal shelving unit and the ceiling, a feat of pure core strength and gymnastics. As the mercenary stepped beneath her, she dropped. She didn't make a sound. She landed squarely on his shoulders, her knees locking around his neck like a vice. Before the man could even register the weight, Maya drove the heavy steel tip of the oxygen tank regulator she had unhooked directly into the base of his helmet, stunning him. He tried to yell, raising his rifle, but Maya was a blur of lethal motion. She dropped the tank, her right hand flashing to the pocket of her scrubs. The heavy trauma shears she carried weren't for cutting bandages. In one fluid, brutal motion, she drove the pointed steel tip of the shears through the soft, unarmored gap between his tactical vest and his neck collar, severing his carotid artery instantly. She clamped her hand over his mouth, riding his massive frame to the floor, guiding him down so his armor wouldn't make a sound against the linoleum. He thrashed for exactly 4 seconds before his body went completely limp. Maya exhaled a slow, controlled breath. She didn't hesitate. She rolled the dead man over and swiftly stripped him of his gear. She tossed her crooked glasses aside. She unclipped his chest rig, throwing it over her teal scrubs. She pulled his spare magazines and finally lifted the blood-spattered HK-4 Stin rifle. She checked the chamber with a quick press check. A brass round gleamed back at her. Loaded, suppressed. Down the hall, the remaining 3 mercenaries were preparing to throw a flashbang into room 412 to finish off the Marines. Inside the room, Hayes was sweating profusely, aiming his rifle at the door, preparing to die. Brooks was bleeding out rapidly, his skin pale. Hayes, Brooks wheezed. When they breach, you drop as many as you can. Aura, Sergeant Hayes whispered, a tear of adrenaline and fear tracking down his cheek. Suddenly a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway right behind the doorway of their room. Hayes spun on his heel, his finger tightening on the trigger. Target! He screamed, ready to fire. He froze. Stepping into the faint red light spilling from the doorway was the rookie nurse. But it wasn't the trembling, clumsy girl who had dropped medical tape 5 minutes ago. Maya stood with perfect predatory posture. She wore a black tactical chest rig over her bloodied teal scrubs. In her hands, she held the captured assault rifle tight against her shoulder, her cheek welded to the stock. Both eyes open, scanning the angles with the cold, dead-eyed efficiency of a seasoned killer. Hayes lowered his rifle an inch, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Reynolds. Maya didn't look at him. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a nervous laugh. Without taking her eyes off the hallway, she took her left hand off the handguard of her rifle and flashed 3 rapid, precise Tier 1 tactical hand signals. Enemy. 3. I am flanking. Hold position. Hayes stared at the blood-soaked, heavily armed woman, his brain completely failing to process the reality before him. The fumbling rookie nurse was gone. The SEAL had taken the floor. Hayes didn't have time to process the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing. Before his brain could formulate a word, Maya was already in motion, disappearing from the doorway and melting back into the crimson-lit corridor. 15 feet down the hall, the 3 remaining mercenaries were stacked tightly outside room 412. The number 2 man pulled the M84 stun grenade from his webbing, his thumb hookings with a pull ring. They were anticipating frightened, disorganized Marines inside the room. They were completely unprepared for a Tier 1 ghost flanking them from their own cleared rear. Maya didn't yell to demand their surrender. She didn't hesitate. She operated on the brutal, mathematical efficiency drilled into her at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. She raised the captured HK-400 Stin, the red emergency strobes briefly reflecting off her cold, unblinking eyes. She centered her reticle on the mercenary holding the flashbang and squeezed the trigger. The thud. The suppressed rifle spat a tight, controlled burst. The first 5.56 millimeters round shattered the mercenary's wrist. The second and third caught him flush in the temporal lobe, bypassing his Kevlar helmet. He dropped like a stone. The flashbang, its pin already pulled halfway out by the dying man's flinching hand, clattered onto the hard linoleum floor. Grenade! The point man screamed, his voice muffled by his heavy balaclava. The remaining 2 mercenaries abandoned their stack, diving desperately in opposite directions as the M84 detonated. The explosion was deafening, a blinding flash of magnesium light and a concussive boom of 170 decibels that shattered the remaining overhead light fixtures and sent a shockwave rattling down the ward. Maya had anticipated the blast. A split second before detonation, she had pivoted, burying her face into the crook of her shoulder and closing her eyes tight, preserving her night vision. The shockwave passed, she snapped back around. The point man was disoriented, struggling to bring his weapon up. Maya closed the distance with terrifying speed. She didn't waste ammunition on his armored torso. She transitioned seamlessly from her rifle to the Sig Sauer P320 she had retrieved from the nurse's desk. 2 rapid shots sent a mass, staggered him, dropping his guard, followed instantly by a single, devastating shot to the T-box, the bridge of the nose, shutting down his central nervous system before his body hit the floor. Only one left, The mercenary leader, a hardened former private military contractor named Thomas Holt, had rolled into an adjacent empty patient room during the flashbang's detonation. He scrambled behind an overturned heavy wooden desk, breathing hard. This was all wrong. The intelligence provided by the cartel was flawed. They were supposed to be facing 2 conventional infantrymen. Whoever was in the hallway was moving, shooting, and communicating with JSOC-level precision. Inside room 420T's, as trembling, his rifle aimed at the door, he had heard the suppressed fire, the grenade, and the wet thuds of bodies hitting the floor. Suddenly, Maya's voice crackled through the secure comms channel on Brooks' tactical radio, a frequency she had memorized upon reading his gear specs during a clumsy moment 2 nights prior. "Corporal Hayes, this is Reynolds. I have 2 tangos down, 1 remaining barricaded in room 410. He has the fatal funnel. Do not exit your room. Secure your sergeant and plug his gunshot wound. Acknowledge." Hayes stared at the radio on his wounded commander's chest. She's on our tactical net," he whispered, his mind blown. He keyed his own radio. "Roger that, Reynolds. Sergeant Brooks is hit bad. Arterial bleed. Sir. Use your cat tourniquet high and tight on the arm, then pack the shoulder wound with combat gauze," Maya commanded, her voice devoid of any nurse-like timidity. It was the sharp, undeniable bark of a commanding officer. "I am neutralizing the final target. Hold what you have." In room 410, Holt checked his magazine. He was trapped. He keyed his shoulder mic. "Eagle 2, this is actual. Status." Silence. Holt cursed under his breath. He unclipped a fragmentation grenade from his belt. If he was going to die in a military hospital, he was going to take the target and the mystery shooter with him. But Maya Reynolds didn't play by conventional infantry rules. She knew entering the doorway of room 410 was suicide. Holt had the angle, so she bypassed the door entirely. Military hospitals were built with efficiency in mind. Rooms 410 and 412 shared a connecting Jack and Jill bathroom for patient convenience. Maya silently slipped back into room 412, stepping right past a wide-eyed Hayes and a bleeding Brooks. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling absolute silence, and pointed toward the adjoining bathroom door. Hayes nodded slowly, lowering his rifle, watching in awe as the blood-soaked woman stacked up on the bathroom door. Maya pushed the door open an inch. Through the darkness, she could see the faint green glow of Holt's night vision goggles peering out into the hallway, his back completely exposed to the bathroom. She didn't shoot. The drywall was thin, and a missed shot could ricochet and hit the oxygen lines built into the walls, blowing the entire floor. She slung her rifle. She drew the heavy, flexible rubber of a medical tourniquet from her scrub pocket. Stepping out of the bathroom with the absolute silence of a stalking panther, she closed the 3 yards between them. Holt realized his mistake a fraction of a second too late. The subtle, unnatural shift of air behind him triggered his combat instincts. He spun, raising his carbine, but Maya was already inside his guard. She parried the barrel of his rifle away with her left forearm, stepping deep into his center of gravity. With her right hand, she whipped the heavy rubber tourniquet around his thick neck. In a blur of motion, she crossed her wrists, creating a makeshift garrote, and dropped her entire body weight backward, driving her knee violently into the small of his back. Holt gagged, his hands flying to his throat to claw at the rubber, cutting off his airflow. He was massive, easily outweighing Maya by 80 pounds, and he thrashed with the panicked, desperate strength of a drowning man. He slammed her backward into the drywall, trying to crush her ribs, but Maya's grip was iron. She had survived Serra, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape school. She had survived interrogations and close-quarters brawls in places that didn't exist on any map. This mercenary was nothing but meat in physics. She hooked her legs around his waist, locking him in a body triangle, shutting off the blood flow to his brain. "Night, night," she whispered coldly in his ear. Holt's struggles grew frantic, then sluggish. 10 seconds later, his hands dropped from his throat. His eyes rolled back into his head, and the massive mercenary collapsed backward, unconscious and dying, taking Maya down with him. She held the choke for an extra 10 seconds just to be sure, then uncoiled from his body, gasping for breath. She checked his pulse. Nothing. The threat was neutralized. Maya stood up, her muscles screaming, her teal scrubs drenched in sweat and blood. The ward was deathly silent, save for the howling wind of the storm outside. She checked her watch. It had been exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds since the lights went out. From down the hallway, the heavy thump of combat boots echoed from the main stairwell. The booming, unmistakable voices of the Marine Corps Quick Reaction Force from Naval Base San Diego pierced the darkness. Breaching, breaching. Marines coming through. Maya didn't celebrate. She went to work. She rapidly stripped off the mercenary's tactical chest rig and kicked the captured rifle under a hospital bed. She pulled the tourniquet from Holt's neck and stuffed it back into her pocket. She found her crooked glasses on the floor, cracked a lens on purpose, and shoved them onto her face. Finally, she smeared a streak of Holt's blood across her own cheek, mussed her hair, and dropped to her knees, hugging her arms around herself. When a squad of heavily armed, flashlight-wielding Marines stormed into room 410, they found a dead, heavily armored mercenary on the floor, and a terrifyingly fragile, sobbing nurse cowering in the corner. "Clear," the squad leader yelled, sweeping his rifle over the dead mercenary. "We've got a civilian survivor here. Get a medic up here now." 2 Marines rushed to Maya, gently pulling her to her feet. "It's okay, ma'am," one of them said softly. "You're safe now. Who took this guy out?" Maya sniffled, letting a tear roll down her cheek. I don't know," she whimpered, her voice trembling perfectly. The Marines in the other room. They were so brave." The squad moved into room 412, finding Hayes covered in sweat, applying pressure to Brooks's bandaged shoulder, and Mateo Ruiz hyperventilating on the bed. "Corporal Hayes," the squad leader barked. "Report, where are the tangos?" Hayes looked at the squad leader, then looked past him. Standing in the hallway, illuminated by the flashlights of the rescue team, was Maya. She was paying the traumatized civilian flawlessly, accepting a blanket from a Navy corpsman. But for one brief, fleeting second, Maya locked eyes with Hayes. The trembling stopped, her posture straightened by a fraction of an inch. She raised her right index finger to her lips in a silent, commanding shh. Hayes swallowed hard. He looked down at his rifle, then up at the squad leader. He had a million questions. He knew what he had seen. But he also knew that whatever ghost was haunting this hospital, she was on their side. They walked into a fatal funnel, Staff Sergeant. Hayes lied smoothly, his voice steadying. "I caught them in the hallway. Done to whole mag. I think one of them tripped his own flashbang." "Hell of a job, Corporal," the Staff Sergeant grunted, patting Hayes on the shoulder. "You saved the package." An hour later, the hospital was swarming with FBI, NCIS, and DEA agents. Power had been restored. The bodies were being bagged and tagged. Special Agent Richard Bowman, the lead investigator for the Ruiz case, stepped out of the elevator. He looked furious. He stormed past the barricades, heading straight toward the nurse's station where Maya was sitting with a blanket draped over her shoulders, sipping a cup of tepid coffee. As Bowman walked past her, Maya didn't look up, but as he passed within inches of her chair, she whispered, her voice low and sharp, "Check Brenda's offshore accounts." The charge nurse. She propped the fire doors and gave them the camera blind spots. That's how they bypassed the perimeter. Agent Bowman stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly turned his head, looking at the clumsy, bespectacled rookie nurse, staring vacantly into her coffee cup. A subtle, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of the DE agent's mouth. He gave a single slow nod, turning his attention toward the older charge nurse, sweating nervously by the exit. "Appreciate the assist, Lieutenant," Bowman murmured under his breath before marching away. Over by the medical transport stretchers, paramedics were preparing to load Sergeant Brooks into an ambulance for emergency surgery. Hayes stood by his side, his uniform stained with his commander's blood. As they rolled the stretcher past the nurse's station, Brooks weakly turned his head. His eyes found Maya. The battle-hardened Marine sergeant didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He slowly raised his left, uninjured hand and offered a crisp, perfectly executed salute. Maya offered a shy, nervous smile, adjusting her broken glasses, but under the table where nobody else could see, her hand formed a fist, tapping her chest, twice a silent operator's acknowledgement of respect. The rookie nurse had survived the night, but the SEAL was already preparing for the next mission. Did this intense story of survival, deception, and ultimate badassery keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching a classified SEAL turn the tables on elite mercenaries, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with your friends and let us know your favorite moment in the comments below.